All right. Well, thank you for coming. I, I know in the write up, they said this would be fascinating, and I can't promise anything. Um, so prepare to be underwhelmed. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the trees in Rockland and 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 the activity around them. Um, uh, One thing I want to stress is that there's really good news and there's bad news. I'll erase this rather juvenile drawing of tree. Oh. Well, that's the fascinating part.
All right, so I'm not pushing too hard on that.
Yeah,
There we go.
I'll be more gentle. We've got lots of trees. That's the good news. We've got wonderful trees. We've got wonderful specimens. This street map that was prepared by Susan Beebe, a local artist who's sitting right over there, points out some spectacular trees that are right in this neighborhood. And I'm not going to talk at length about those spectacular trees. We have quite a diversity of trees. We've got oaks, maples, and fir and spruce and all kinds. The bad news is that a lot of the trees that grew up in Maine, or in Rockland, I should say, are essentially weeds. They grew up in places where nobody mowed, nobody really cared for them. Nobody made a plan about the tree's existence, and as a result, we have problems with trees, and tree maintenance becomes an issue for homeowners and the town alike. Well, I'll get to that. We really do have a lot of beautiful trees. Right around the corner on Talbot Avenue is a beautiful sugar maple. But there are two that rival it on both on the north end and the south end. And we've got excellent lindens growing just off North Main Street at James and Cedars, or is it Cedar? No, not Cedar Street. No. Chestnut Street, James and Chestnut Street, where it intersects North Main. There's a couple of beautiful lindens there that are I estimate 90 feet tall, maybe 100. That's all right. Yeah, that's okay. I don't know how old I am. I should stress that I am not the end all and be all of not tree knowledge. I had a short span of working with trees as a professional, and I learned a lot and enjoyed it, and it really capped off my lifelong interest in trees. But there are a lot of people who know more. There are scientists who study trees, dendrologists, and they're referring to the experts. Is why I bought the books in. It's always good to if you're interested in trees to refer to the people who know, and of course everybody has opinions, and I'm not alone. I mean, I'm not an exception. I'm gonna stress at the end some things that not everybody agrees with, but I think it's important to know that our trees need care. I'm here as an advertisement for local arborists. There's a lot of good tree care people in town and in the area in Knox County. And if you have a big tree or many big trees, it's not a bad idea to have them assessed occasionally. Trees were evolved. Guess where? In the forest. And we grow them in town, and it's not necessarily that good for them. A tree grown in the forest is aiming at a spot of sunlight way up above it. And it develops a tall structure, very phototropic. It lends itself to good structure, and trees in the forest also support each other. They have a plan. Their DNA has worked over millions of years to make healthy forests. They compete for sunlight and nutrient, but they also cooperate in ways which we're just beginning to understand. A tree grown in the open, your typical lawn tree, ends up aiming to fill the whole sky, and it grows a lot rounder and broader, and it also develops competing leaders. About to knock the thing over again. Be prepared. Do you understand what a competing leader is? The apex growth of the tree is aiming for the sun. It's pointing straight up, but in an open grown tree, they really are stimulated beyond their capacity. They develop competing leaders. They get problems of included bark in these narrow joints, and that's a structural problem that arborists are aware of and set out to mitigate for, either by bracing or training pruning the tree as it grows, which is the best way. I have notes. Yeah. Has anyone here ever planted a tree? Good for you. We're going to talk a lot about planting a tree. I want you to be able to know the trees in your yard, so that you can tell if anyone. One thing I forgot to mention is that along with trees comes a certain amount of risk. They get big. You can imagine a truckload of baseball bats poised above your house, ready to fall, and that's what you've got in a tree. unless it's strong and structurally sound. Um, a lot of the trees in Rockland are weeds that haven't had any care, no training, no pruning that to avoid the structural problems that I've discussed, and 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 that's one of the reasons we have so many power outages. The trees, of course, they're grown in places where they don't belong. They're grown in they're allowed to grow under the wires in many instances, and wires, utility lines and trees are a really bad mix. Arborists hate the utility lines, and the utility workers hate the trees. but but um, there are ways to to plan and to avoid the problems. I know a few years back we had the utility company come in to trim around the utility lines. They did a lot of damage to a lot of trees because they're in a hurry. They don't have time to to take care of the tree's health. Their main concern is not getting electrocuted while they're working up in the air, not getting electrocuted and not falling from their bucket truck. Um, if homeowners would plan ahead, they would have their trees cared for professionally, and that would one of the things that a professional would do would be to make sure that they're not growing into the power lines. And they can be strengthened with cables and braces on occasion. These narrow crotches can have through bolts put through them to help them to help support them. It's interesting though, different kinds of trees are not so susceptible to the damage that comes from these narrow structural defects, narrow crotches. The elms are so strong and cross grained that you can't tear those crotches apart, and your sugar maples and your red oaks, they're so strong that they're not weakened so much by the structural defects. But any tree can develop problems, and it's really up to an arborist to assess and deal with the needs of the tree. When planting a tree, what's the first step? Anybody know? Dig a hole? There you go. That's the first step. Don't digging a hole where it's not, where a tree isn't appropriate is a big mistake, and it's done again and again. I don't know if any of you remember the Tuttle Shoe Barn down on Route 1. They planted these red maples, a tree which grows to be 60, 80 feet tall in maturity, and they planted them directly beneath the power lines. and it's a disaster waiting to happen. It's hard for the trees. It makes an impossible job for the utility workers. they really can't do anything to make that tree work well there. So you find out what your tree is. If you want to plan for a tree, you plan for its place and where it fits. We do have trees that only grow 20 feet tall, and they're wonderful specimens, and they're appropriate under the wires. I'm trying to think of an example. There are places in town which I'd love to plant trees. I go around looking for places where there are no utility lines, and we have that's another part of the good news that we have in this town. We have an active tree board. And I'm the tree warden. I'm the chairman of the tree board, and we're working at getting some of those good places for trees filled with good trees. And there's a lot of wasted effort in planting trees where they're not appropriate, planting the kind of tree that can't survive under the conditions, either too wet. There are trees that are sensitive to rose salt that has to be taken into account. Sugar maples, for example, really don't tolerate that well, neither do white pines. But if you take the time to plan and learn, find out from the nursery what you're planting, you can enjoy that tree for 40 years, 50 years, the rest of your life, however long it lasts. And it's a joy to participate in the tree's life. I personally have grown a lot of trees from seeds. So I get to watch them grow from the size of a thing you can hold in your hand to I guess the biggest one I've grown from seed is now like 40 feet tall and a foot in diameter, or 14 inches in diameter, and that's a great process if you have children. Planting a tree with a child is a wonderful event, because that child can watch it grow as he grows, and there's nothing quite like that. So we got a plan. That's our first step. We plan to put the right tree in the right place. Then you dig a hole. Yes, that is a step in the right direction. I don't want to give the nursery profession a hard time. They have wonderful products. Their trees are big already, and that gives you that instant gratification that everybody wants when they want a tree in their yard. They want something that's there. But I advocate for planting trees when they're tiny. They develop the baldwin burlap, the trees in pots. They have traumatized root systems that they can overcome. They often do. That people have been doing this for decades, centuries, I guess, and they succeed. But if you really want to plant a tree that's as healthy as it can be, start with a seed. That's not practical for everybody. It's exciting to go to the nursery and get a good tree and start start your own arboretum at home. One thing that happens in nurseries that people aren't aware of, and this is an important step in planting a tree. The trees in pots, of course, when you plant the tree, how deep do you dig a hole? That's a question. And the answer depends on several things. If you've got a tree in a pot, I've drawn one that's pretty good. See the difference there? This one has the tree's roots at the level of the soil in the pot. This one, who knows? Sometimes when nurseries are transplanting trees into larger pots, they put the tree down in here and put soil on top of it to support it. But it's really not, you don't want to plant the tree at that level. You want to remove this material and plant the tree so that the root flare is visible. This can also happen in bald and burlap trees, especially when they're dug up by a tree spade in loose soil. They have this big equipment that gets the tree out of the field, and it's really kind of brutal. Grass, three sides with big hydraulic spades, and it can push the soil up around the trunk again, just like in a pot. So when you plant a tree, one of the important things to do is find that root flare, and that's the level you want. You don't want to dig the hole deeper than you need. You want otherwise it'll settle, it'll be unstable. I didn't knock it over. Yeah. This is a beautifully illustrated, another pamphlet by Susan Beebe. Beautifully illustrated how to plant a tree. And I hope that you stressed finding that root flare and having that at the level of the soil. That is a crucial step. When you see a tree sticking out of the ground like a pencil stuck in a muffin, there's an issue there. Yes, Susan. Yeah, I'm happy to have questions asked. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's correct that what you're talking about, it looks like this is a graft union, and it's interesting that sometimes that can result in incompatibility between if the roots grow at a different rate than the crown, they can rip themselves apart, and there's a tree failure there. But it does work to plant to graft onto um, a smaller species onto a larger species. In instances, I don't even know there's out here in the library, we planted a couple of horse chestnuts, red horse chestnuts. They're a hybrid. They're much smaller than a seed-grown horse chestnut would be, and you can see that knob where the roots are growing faster than the trunk of the tree, and apparently it works out all right. But it can be issues. That's one thing about the trees in the nursery. They have names for them. They're all cultivars, and basically what they are clones. They're selections that are chosen for disease resistance, color, fragrance, any number of factors, form, and they're reproduced by grafting or root division, and basically you get the same tree over and over again, the same genetically identical tree, and that can raise an issue with problems of disease on down the line. If something comes along that affects one of those trees, it's going to affect all of them. One thing about growing seed-grown trees is that you get the forest diversity. You sometimes don't get the greatest structure. You don't get the upright, the perfect lollipop shaped tree that people like, but you have it built-in variability in the genetic makeup of the tree, and it's healthy for the ecology. I talked about how trees evolved in the forest, and one of the things that I've been stressing as the tree warden in recent years is the fact that the forest evolved with a lot of things in it, not just trees, and we have one of the parts of the bad news about the trees in our town is that we have species that are they're beautiful, they're desirable in many ways. People love them, but they don't support wildlife. A lot of the insects that wildlife needs to live on, people don't realize that birds eat seeds, right? But baby birds don't, and even the seeding birds need lots of caterpillars to feed their young, and we won't have chickadees if we don't have caterpillars. So there's a lot of examples of exotic species that are rampant around town, and it's very discouraging. This is the scariest bad news I have to talk about. I mean, climate change is another, but Um, Autumn olive, uh, Oriental bittersweet, Norway maples. um, there is some crossover. Some of these trees will support some insect life, but it, to have abundant biodiversity, the native trees are key. There are keystone species in the food web. Um, cherry, maple, and cherry, oak, and willow support. Yes. Yeah. 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 This is a great book about the living landscape. It's the author Doug Tallamy has written several books on this theme. One is called Nature's Best Hope. And if like me, you grew up appreciating birds and wildlife, um, um, you might want to think about making sure that you have some native trees and shrubs in your property. Which book is that? This one? Yeah, yeah. That's good. I'm glad you have a copy of that. That's a great little book about native trees that, yeah. Um, yeah, our tree board has been promoting this book, and it's a great little volume about native trees. There's a lot of books written about it. This is a book I bought in over 20 years ago. I bought it in softback form. This is Native Trees for North America, for North American Landscapes, authored by Guy Sternberg and Jim Wilson. And it gives a lot of information about growing native trees. There are a lot of exotic trees that people love, and I plant them. I've grown. I planted a Japanese stewardia that I grew from a seed at the library here. It's a nice tree. It blooms spectacularly. The bees love it, but it doesn't have any it won't feed any caterpillars around here. It evolved feeding caterpillars in East Asia and Japan, and 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 it the thing is, you can grow your favorite specimen, but keep in mind that if you appreciate wildlife, you need to grow other things as well. And the author of this book, Doug Tallamy, suggests a ratio of, what is it, 70% native. Yeah, you know, the Norway maples, birds land in them. They nest in them. They 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 shade your house. They are, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with a non-native tree, but the 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 important factor is that they just don't support the food chain. Oh, back to tree planting. I did say that the best way to plant a tree is put a seed in the ground where you want the tree to grow. I think I said that. That's not always practical. Squirrels will eat tree seeds, and rodents will impact your efforts. But it's really a fun way to grow a tree, that's for sure. And a tree that's planted when it's young has a better chance of having a really healthy root system, and it will spread its roots out and mingle its roots with other trees, and it's a wonder to watch. Yes. uh, it, 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 it's not a bad idea. Trees help support each other. Um, trees don't always play nice together. Um, they can have interactions that are destructive, but given a certain distance, they'll they'll arrange their crowns, and you can have some training pruning done on them, and and they'll mingle all right. I know your property, and I don't know that you can plant a whole lot of trees there, but you could certainly plant a couple, and that would be nice. Yes. Yes, yes. I got acorns from those to grow white oaks from them. I I one of my most successful white oaks is right in this neighborhood. It's growing in Rose Wilson's yard, and it grew 28 inches last year, which is remarkable for a white oak. Oaks have a reputation for growing very slowly. People they they people people who have a penchant for instant gratification don't like them because they tend to grow so slowly. But if you pamper them, if you know how to treat them right, plant them when they're young, so that they can get good root systems, um, they can surpass a nursery grown tree in a few years. I've seen this happen many times. My neighbor, he planted a Norway maple in his yard, and at the same time I germinated the seeds of a tulip tree that I put in beside my driveway, and in 5 years the tulip tree was taller than the Norway maple that this guy planted. It was already 10 feet tall. Unfortunately it got destroyed. They moved it for construction. They moved it with an excavator, and that wasn't the preferred method. It's actually surviving. One thing that happens if you cut down a tree, do you think it's gone? No. No, the roots are still alive, and many trees there's a lot of stored energy in the roots, and they'll send up a new crown as soon as they can. They'll try to fill the sky again. Yes. Mm-hmm. 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 Um, y- um, there, it's, I don't know whether that's bad advice or not. I mean, you can let the tree, you can let the suckers grow from that elm, but the disease will undoubtedly kill them once they reach maturity. It's probably still in its roots. Um, I don't. That's a good question. You know, the disaster of the elms happened when I was a kid, and I don't have that much experience with them because of that. Susan? Yeah. Right. And yeah, that's a beautiful elm. That's for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, but that's an iconic picture for sure. Um, there are elms that show some resistance to the blight, and they're trying to do crossbreeding and experimenting with um, bringing back the elms that have some resistance, and there will be elm trees to come. It's, and the chestnuts, of course, that happened before any of us were born. I think back in the 30s, that the chestnut blight wiped out the chestnut trees, and they persist as stump sprouts too. Um, and you can still find some examples of American chestnuts in hidden corners around the state. I've seen a few of them, and they're doing the same thing with that, trying to breed a disease-resistant variety. Of course, it's 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 problematic. Um, if they find a variety that works, they'll be cloning it. So they'll have a monoculture of elms that have a very narrow genetic makeup, which is not the best thing, but it's worth the effort. Both the elm and the chestnut were amazing trees in their time, and it's a real tragedy. So many of the things that plague the natural world today were brought about by people who were enthusiastic about plants, and and we carried these invasive species, these exotic species that are fine. They're they're lovely. Um, they have they have all kinds of wonderful features, but they they're kind of a disaster for the ecology. Uh, I'm about talked out. Do we have more questions? Yeah, yeah. Hmm. I have no idea. You could try that. Really? the Arbor Day Foundation was giving those away as gifts for as a reward for donations. I I grew. Oh yeah, yeah. I grew a Washington Hawthorn that 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 I got from the Arbor Day Foundation. They come in the mail, like they look like dead sticks, and and it's pretty exciting when they actually result in something. So um, you could try rooting them that way. You could you could try taking the seeds out of the fruit and germinating them too. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's I was really excited about 6 years ago. I got some yellowwood seeds to germinate, and the yellowwood, it's not a very familiar, people aren't very familiar with it. It's a species that grows in the Western Appalachians, but it's probably one that could have made it here if if there hadn't been a great extinction at the end of the ice ages. Um, so I consider it kind of a native. It's native to North America anyway. It grows in Indiana and Kentucky and Tennessee and places like that. And I got these seeds to germinate, and I'm really excited about it. I planted one in McDougal Park, the new park in town. I planted a couple of them there, and I, I I'm I'm 70 years old or 69 years old, and I it's going to be another 15 years before it can bloom. But I'm keeping my fingers crossed. It's it's uh it's a beautiful tree in bloom, and it's really exciting to to bring a tree from the seed to a bloom. I'm lucky. I got some trees that are really promis what's the word? I can't think of it. They're precocious. They bloom really early in life. The Carolina silver bells. I've got one that's only this tall, and it's going to bloom profusely this year. It's so that was exciting. The seeds I got from there's Carolina silver bells growing down behind the in yeah, down behind the Thorndike, exactly, down in the parking lot, in the corner of a parking lot. And when I found those trees, I was flabbergasted. I knew of silver bells, but I thought they're called Carolina silver bells. I didn't think they'd grow here at all. And when I found out they could grow here, I was astounded. And then when I got some seeds to germinate, I was also astounded. I tried to grow some from cutting using root hormones, but that didn't work. If you do that, there's different strategies. There's a Facebook group called Tree Propagation where they talk about a lot of that, different strategies for getting cuttings to grow. Whether you take green cuttings from summer or dormant cuttings from winter. Different trees work at with different strategies. That's one of the fascinating things I found about trees is they have these different strategies for 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 reproducing that are amazing. They it's hard to get some trees to germinate, some seeds to germinate, but there are strategies for that too, and that tree propagation Facebook page will talks a lot about it. It's a fun site. I just recently found out about it. Yeah. Oh, please. No. Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 Oh. You move it by digging it up. Um, a good time would Acoustic Dog would. I don't have any experience with transplanting those. What's that? Yeah, if you when you dig it up, you have to carefully cut the roots so that they're clean cuts, and that helps them regenerate. Yeah, yeah. Um, Probably the best time to move it would be in the spring. Most trees like to be transplanted in the spring, but I don't know. Some trees prefer the fall, but the midsummer is a bad time. They get transplant shock pretty bad. Yeah, you definitely would have better luck moving a smaller tree. I've let's see, I've moved a, a tree that had a massive root ball, lifted it with a backhoe, and I don't know how big it wasn't that big. It's maybe this big around, but we dug a trench around it and and trussed up all the soil with ropes, and it was quite a process. Um, the 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 biggest tree in the world that ever got moved was a ginkgo tree that in China that it was uh, revered for spiritual reasons from this village, but that this dam project was going to flood it. So they actually moved this 800-year-old tree up to the mountainside where it would be out of the way of the dam. It cost millions of dollars, and they were successful. Ginkgos ginkgos are fascinating trees. They're living fossils, like so many of our trees. They've been around for a long, long time. Um, I'm yeah, yeah. I I I I'm I planted a ginkgo last season right over here on the library grounds. Um, and I didn't choose it. Um, I was working with another fellow, Davis Saltonstall, and he picked it out, and I would have chosen a maybe a pin oak or something that would match the pin oak that's out here. But we had a ginkgo, so we planted it. Yeah, I I planted several trees last year. Well, we're really running out of time. I want to make sure everybody has a chance to ask questions. Susan? Oh. It's just an example of the odd way that this is a piece of sugar maple, and up in the crown they get these odd projections and flanges and stuff, it's really common in sugar maples, and you don't see it because it's way up in the top. But some of the lateral branches get these weird ears and stuff. So I just brought that as a curiosity. I have here a visible pruning wound, which shows an example of how a pruning wound heals. It's an interesting little item. Are there any more questions? Yes. 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 Uh-huh. Right. Right. There's a lot of native understory plants that you could grow among them that would help support wildlife better. Hawthorns and willows, shrubs, nanny berries. There's native viburnums. I'm really fond of the native viburnums we have growing in Maine. There's a lot of shrubs that that are kind of unrecognized, but they grow wild here and they're beautiful. And I could give you a list, but oh yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. They have a lot of things available. Any other questions? Uh-huh. Well, you could plant something better, but you might end up with the same problem. Squirrels will climb native trees just as well as they, but but there are trees that don't whose roots aren't quite as invasive. I don't know what to suggest, but a red oak. Yeah, they they're yeah. Yeah, and they cast really dense shade. They'll kill your lawn. Um, yes, Hobby's Tree Service. Yeah, Yeah, yeah. It- well, they, the Norway maples make good firewood too. Um, but yeah, her tree is one that's really it's done that thing where it's grown in the open and it's gotten all kinds of narrow crotches with decay in them and yeah. Um, oh, I, oh, yeah. It's on city property. The street, it's this, yeah, yeah. Do you want to have it removed? Uh, right. Where do you live? Yeah, yeah. I'll check it out sometime. Um, yeah. Well, I'm not the city arborist actually. I'm the tree warden, which is a voluntary position. It doesn't pay anything. It's it's we're a bunch of the tree board is a bunch of kind of flaky granola chomping busybodies, but 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 from another perspective, we're people who love the community and want good things happening in it, and so it's a contentious issue when a tree is not necessarily on private property. You got to get out the survey maps and determine it. I don't know if the city would remove it for you or not, but you could have them look into that. You could call Chris Donlin or yeah, yeah. I yeah. Well, they find their ways. They live in cracks in the rocks. They're amazing creatures. And we have gone over time. I really appreciate your all coming. I'm
No worries. Thanks so much, Rissa. This is fantastic. Thank you.